Story 1. I work night shifts at a 24-hour pharmacy, and what happened last Christmas Eve almost made me quit. I'm partially deaf in my left ear from a childhood injury, which never really affected my life much until that night. It meant I couldn't always tell where sounds were coming from, and I definitely couldn't hear someone approaching from my left side. The pharmacy is in a strip mall on the edge of town. During the day, it's busy with people picking up prescriptions and buying last-minute gifts, but after 10 p.m., especially on holidays, the place becomes a ghost town. On Christmas Eve, I was the only employee working from 11 p.m. to 7 a.m. My manager always scheduled solo shifts on holiday nights because nobody ever came in. I didn't mind working Christmas Eve. I'm not really close with my family, and the holiday pay was good. Plus, I figured I'd just watch movies on my phone and get paid to do basically nothing. The first few hours were exactly that. I restocked some shelves, organized the prescription pickup area, and scrolled through my phone. Around 1:30 a.m., the front door chimed. I looked up and saw a woman walking in. She was maybe in her mid-40s, wearing a heavy winter coat and carrying a purse. Her hair was pulled back tight, and she had this smile that seemed a little too wide for someone shopping alone at this hour. She walked straight to the greeting card aisle without looking at me. I went back to my phone, keeping an eye on her through the security mirror mounted in the corner. Store policy said I had to watch customers, especially solo late-night shoppers, in case of theft. She stood there reading cards for what felt like 10 minutes. Then she put one back and walked to the next aisle. That's when I noticed she wasn't actually shopping. She'd pick something up, look at it, then put it back in the exact same spot. She did this with shampoo bottles, cough medicine, candy bars, just picking things up and putting them down. It was weird, but not threatening. I figured maybe she was killing time or having some kind of mental health episode. Then she walked to the pharmacy counter where I was standing. She smiled at me again, wider this time, and asked if we sold phone chargers. I told her we did, and pointed to the electronics section near the front. She thanked me and walked that direction, but she didn't go to the electronics. She went to the vitamin aisle instead. I felt a small knot form in my stomach. Something about her movements felt off, like she was circling. I checked the time on my phone. It was 1:47 a.m. I told myself I was being paranoid, that she was probably just a lonely person wandering around on Christmas Eve. But then I noticed something that made my breath catch. She had walked past the front windows, and I saw her reflection in the glass. She was staring directly at me, while pretending to look at vitamins. The second I noticed, she looked down at the shelf like nothing happened. That's when I realized she'd been watching me the entire time. I walked to the back room and locked myself inside. I called my manager, but it went straight to voicemail. I called the store owner next, same thing. Everyone was with their families. I stood there for maybe 2 minutes trying to decide what to do. I couldn't call the police just because someone was acting strange. She hadn't done anything illegal. When I came back out, she was gone. The front door hadn't chimed, so she had to still be in the store. I looked at the security monitor behind the counter, which showed 4 different camera angles. I scanned each one and finally spotted her in the seasonal aisle, standing completely still, facing the shelf. I kept watching her on the monitor. She didn't move for almost 3 full minutes. Not to pick something up, not to adjust her purse, nothing. She just stood there like a statue. Then, without any warning, she turned her head directly toward the camera and smiled. It felt like she was looking right through the screen at me. I stepped back from the monitor. My hands were shaking. I grabbed my phone and kept it in my pocket with 911 ready to dial. The front door chimed, and I felt a wave of relief thinking she was leaving. But when I checked the monitor again, she was still in the seasonal aisle. The door had chimed, but nobody had gone through it. That's when I heard footsteps behind me. I spun around, and she was standing at the end of the pharmacy counter, just staring at me. She hadn't walked up. I would have heard her. She was just suddenly there. I asked her if she needed help, trying to keep my voice steady. She tilted her head slightly and asked if I was here alone. I lied and said no, that my coworker was in the back. She smiled again and said she didn't see anyone else's car in the parking lot. My stomach dropped. She'd been outside. She'd checked. I told her I needed to help another customer and walked toward the front of the store, even though there was no one else there. I just needed distance from her. She followed me, not quickly, but steadily. I pretended to straighten a display near the registers, and she stopped about 10 feet away, watching. I asked again if she needed anything. She said no, that she was just looking. Then she asked what time I got off work. I didn't answer. I walked back behind the pharmacy counter and locked the little half door that separated the customer area from the employee area. She walked up to the counter and leaned against it, resting her elbows on the surface. She told me she'd been watching me for a while now. that she comes in every few nights just to see me. I felt my face go cold. I'd never seen this woman before in my life. I asked her to leave and she laughed. Not a normal laugh, but something quiet and unsettling. She said she wasn't doing anything wrong, that the store was open to the public. She was right. I couldn't make her leave unless she was causing a disturbance. Then my phone buzzed. I looked down at the screen and saw a text from an unknown number. It said, "You look scared." I looked up at her, and she was holding her phone, smiling. I asked how she got my number. She said it wasn't hard, that she knew a lot about me. I dialed 911 right there in front of her. I told the operator that someone was harassing me at my workplace and that I felt unsafe. The woman didn't move. She just kept smiling. The operator said they were sending an officer and to stay on the line. I did. The woman finally stepped back from the counter. She said she'd leave, that she didn't want to cause trouble. She walked toward the front door, stopped, and turned around one more time. She told me she'd see me again soon. Then she left. The door chimed, and I watched through the windows as she got into a car and drove away. I couldn't see the license plate from where I was standing. The police arrived about 10 minutes later. I explained everything, showed them the text message, and gave them the security footage. The officer said they'd file a report and increase patrols in the area, but without a direct threat, there wasn't much they could do. He told me to call immediately if she came back. She didn't come back that night, but 2 days later I got another text from the same number. It was a photo of the outside of my apartment building. No message, just the photo. I filed another police report. They traced the number, but it was from a burner phone. Dead end. I quit that job a week later. I couldn't handle being alone in that store anymore, knowing she could walk in at any time. I still don't know who she was or how she got my information. Sometimes I wonder if she's still watching, just waiting for the right moment. I close my curtains every night now, and I never work alone anymore. Story 2. My family rented a cabin in the mountains for Christmas week, and I'll never forget what happened on our third night there. The cabin was about 40 minutes from the nearest town, surrounded by thick pine trees, and sitting at the end of a long gravel driveway. It was just me, my mom, my stepdad Ron, and my younger sister Emma, who was 14 at the time. I had just turned 17. The whole trip was my mom's idea. She wanted us to have a quiet family Christmas away from distractions. No phones, no internet, just us together. The cabin didn't have cell service, which my sister and I complained about constantly. There was a landline for emergencies, but that was it. My stepdad loved it. He kept saying we needed to disconnect and appreciate nature. The first 2 days were fine. We played board games, watched DVDs on the old TV, and went on short hikes during the day. The area was beautiful in a cold, isolated way. Snow covered everything, and at night you could see more stars than I'd ever seen in my life. But the silence was intense. No cars, no neighbors, no distant sounds of civilization, just wind and the occasional creak of trees. On the third night, December 23rd, we were sitting in the living room after dinner. My mom and Ron were drinking wine by the fireplace, and Emma was reading a book on the couch. I was looking through the cabin's collection of old DVDs, trying to find something worth watching. That's when we heard the knock on the door. It was light, almost polite, 3 quick taps. We all looked at each other. Ron got up and walked to the front door, asking who it was. No answer. He opened the door and cold air rushed in. Nobody was there. He stepped out onto the porch and looked around, then came back inside shaking his head. He said it was probably an animal or a branch falling. We went back to what we were doing, but I felt uneasy. The knock had sounded too deliberate to be random. About 20 minutes later, it happened again. 3 taps, same rhythm, same door. This time Ron didn't ask who it was. He just yanked the door open fast like he was trying to catch someone. Again, nobody was there. He walked out further this time, all the way to the edge of the porch. I watched him from the window. He was scanning the tree line with a flashlight, but the beam didn't reach very far into the darkness. When he came back in, he looked annoyed. My mom suggested it might be someone playing a prank, maybe a local kid. But we hadn't seen another person since we arrived. Emma asked if we should call someone, and Ron said no. He said there was nothing to call about, that we'd just look paranoid. He locked the door and told us to ignore it if it happened again. We tried to relax, but the mood had shifted. The cabin suddenly felt smaller, like the walls were closing in. An hour passed without anything happening. My mom went to bed around 10:30, and Ron followed shortly after. Emma and I stayed up watching a movie. Around midnight, she said she was tired and headed to her room, which was down the hallway on the first floor. My room was upstairs in the loft area. I stayed downstairs for another 30 minutes, then turned off the TV and the lights. As I walked toward the stairs, I heard something outside. Not a knock this time, but footsteps. They were crunching through the snow, slow and steady, moving along the side of the cabin. I froze and listened. The steps went from the front to the back, then stopped. I grabbed my phone even though it had no service, just to have something in my hand. I walked quietly to the back door and looked through the window. The porch light was on, casting a yellow glow across the snow. I could see footprints leading up to the back door and stopping right at the bottom step. They were fresh. Whoever made them had been there seconds ago. I locked the back door, even though I was pretty sure it was already locked. Then I went upstairs to my room and tried to convince myself it was nothing. Maybe someone was lost and needed help. Maybe they'd leave once they realized nobody was answering, but something felt wrong about the whole thing. If someone needed help, they would have yelled or kept knocking. They wouldn't just walk around the cabin in silence. I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, listening. The cabin was old and it creaked constantly, so every sound made me tense. Around 1 a.m., I heard something that made my heart stop. It was a voice. A man's voice, faint but clear, singing a Christmas carol. It was coming from outside, somewhere near the front of the cabin. I got up and crept to the loft railing where I could see down into the living room. Everything was dark except for the dying embers in the fireplace. The singing continued low and off-key. It sounded like Silent Night, but the words were slurred or mumbled. I couldn't tell if the person was drunk or just singing badly on purpose. Then I heard Ron's bedroom door open downstairs. He walked out into the hallway wearing sweatpants and a t-shirt, holding a flashlight. He was muttering something under his breath, clearly angry. He went to the front door and unlocked it. I wanted to tell him to stop, to not go out there, but I stayed quiet in the loft. He stepped out onto the porch and shined the flashlight around. The singing had stopped. I watched from above as he walked to the edge of the porch and yelled out, "Whoever's out here needs to leave now, or I'm calling the police." His voice echoed through the trees. No response. He stood there for a moment, then turned to come back inside. That's when I saw movement in the tree line. Someone stepped just barely into the edge of the flashlight beam, then stepped back into the shadows. Ron saw it too. He froze, then backed toward the door slowly, keeping the light pointed at the trees. Once he was inside, he locked the door and immediately went for the landline. I came downstairs as he was dialing. He told me to wake up my mom and Emma and get them into the living room. I ran to Emma's room first and shook her awake. She was groggy and confused, but when she saw my face, she got up without arguing. My mom came out looking terrified. Ron was on the phone with what sounded like a 911 operator, explaining where we were, and that someone was outside the cabin refusing to leave. The operator said they'd send someone, but it would take at least 30 minutes because of how remote we were. Ron hung up and told us to stay away from the windows. He turned off all the lights so whoever was outside couldn't see in. We sat together in the dark living room, only the fireplace providing any light. Emma was crying quietly. My mom kept asking Ron what he saw, and he kept saying he didn't know, just someone standing in the trees. That's when the knocking started again, but this time it wasn't just the front door. It came from multiple places. The front door, the back door, the side windows. 3 taps, pause, 3 taps. It was surrounding the cabin. My mom grabbed Emma and held her close. Ron stood near the fireplace holding a poker from the fire tool set. I looked at my phone and saw it was 1:23 a.m. The knocking continued in that same pattern, rotating around the cabin like someone was circling it. Then it stopped. Complete silence. We waited, barely breathing. Minutes passed, nothing. Then we heard the back door handle jiggle. Someone was trying to open it. Ron moved toward the hallway, still holding the poker. The jiggling stopped, and for a few seconds everything was quiet again. Then the front door handle started to turn. Ron yelled out that the police were on their way. The handle stopped moving. We heard footsteps on the porch, then nothing. My mom was whispering for Ron to come back to us, to not go near the doors. He stayed in the hallway, watching both doors. 15 minutes later, we saw headlights coming up the driveway. Ron looked through the window and confirmed it was a police SUV. 2 officers got out and searched the property with flashlights. They were out there for maybe 20 minutes. When they came to the door, Ron let them in. The officers said they found footprints all around the cabin, multiple sets, maybe 2 or 3 people. The prints led into the woods and disappeared. They asked if we had any idea who it might be, or if we'd had any conflicts with anyone recently. We said no. They told us they'd patrol the area throughout the night and that we should call immediately if anything else happened. After they left, none of us slept. We stayed in the living room with all the lights on until sunrise. As soon as it was light out, we packed our things and left. We didn't even stay for Christmas. Ron called the rental company and explained what happened, and they refunded us for the remaining days. On the drive home, Emma found something in her jacket pocket that wasn't there before. It was a small piece of paper, folded up. She unfolded it, and her face went white. She handed it to my mom without saying anything. Written on the paper in messy handwriting were the words, "We watched you sleep." My mom's hands were shaking as she held it. None of us knew how it got in Emma's pocket. She'd been wearing that jacket since we arrived at the cabin. We drove the rest of the way in silence. We never found out who was outside that cabin or what they wanted. The police never called us back with updates. Sometimes I think about how close they got, how they were circling the cabin while we sat inside in the dark, and I think about that note. I don't go to remote places anymore, and I never will. Story 3. I used to work the closing shift at a small electronics repair shop in a strip mall. This was back in December of 2019, right before everything shut down for the pandemic. The shop stayed open late during the holiday season because people were always breaking their phones or tablets and needed them fixed before Christmas. My shift usually ended at 9 p.m., but on weekends I'd stay until 10 p.m. The shop was at the far end of the strip mall, and by the time I closed, most of the other businesses were already dark. There was a grocery store on the opposite end that stayed open until 11, but everything in between shut down by 8 or 9. That meant the parking lot was mostly empty when I left, which never really bothered me until that Saturday night, December 21st. I was alone that night. My coworker had called in sick, and my boss didn't want to come in on a weekend, so it was just me handling repairs and customer pickups. It had been slow all evening. Only 3 people came in and 2 of them were just asking about prices. Around 8:45 p.m., a man walked in. He was probably in his late 30s, average height, wearing a dark jacket and jeans. He was carrying a phone with a cracked screen. He seemed normal at first, polite even. He asked how much it would cost to replace the screen and how long it would take. I told him I could do it in about 40 minutes if he wanted to wait, or he could drop it off and pick it up the next day. He said he'd wait. I took his phone and his name, which he said was David. He sat down in one of the plastic chairs near the window and pulled out a different phone from his pocket. I went to the back workstation and started the repair. The shop had a half wall separating the work area from the waiting area, so I could see customers, but still had some privacy while I worked. I was about 15 minutes into the repair when I realized David was staring at me, not just glancing over but fully staring. Every time I looked up, his eyes were locked on me. I tried to ignore it and focus on the phone, but it made my skin crawl. I kept thinking maybe he was just bored or spacing out, but something about it felt intentional. When I finished the repair, I brought the phone out to the counter and told him it was done. The total was $89. He didn't move from his chair. He just looked at the phone and asked if I tested it to make sure it worked. I said yes, that I always test repairs before returning devices. He stood up slowly and walked to the counter. He paid in cash and I gave him his receipt. Then he asked what time I got off work. I felt a chill run through me. I told him we closed at 10, keeping it vague. He smiled slightly and said that was good to know. He took his phone and left. I watched through the window as he got into a dark sedan parked directly in front of the shop. But he didn't leave. He just sat in his car. I checked the time. It was 9:20 p.m. I still had 40 minutes before I could close. I tried to busy myself with cleaning the work area and organizing the parts drawer, but I kept glancing at the window. His car was still there, and I could see his silhouette in the driver's seat. He wasn't on his phone. He wasn't doing anything. He was just sitting there. At 9:45 p.m., I decided to close early. There was no rule saying I had to stay until exactly 10, and I wasn't getting any more customers. I started shutting down the computer system and turning off the equipment. That's when David got out of his car. He walked up to the front door and tried to open it, but I'd already locked it. He knocked on the glass. I pretended not to hear him and kept working in the back. He knocked again, louder this time. I looked up and he was cupping his hands against the glass, trying to see inside. I walked to the counter and called out that we were closed. He said his phone wasn't working right, that the screen was acting weird. I told him he'd have to come back tomorrow. He knocked again and said it would only take a minute, that he just needed me to look at it. I said no, that I couldn't help him tonight. He stood there for a few more seconds, then walked back to his car. I felt a wave of relief, but he didn't leave. He got back in his car and just sat there again. I pulled out my phone and texted my roommate that I was leaving work soon and to expect me home around 10:15. I also texted my boss explaining that I was closing early because someone was acting strange outside the shop. He didn't respond right away. I finished closing procedures and grabbed my jacket and keys. I turned off all the lights except the security light near the door. I stood by the front entrance for a moment, watching David's car. I couldn't see inside because the windows were tinted, but I knew he was still there. I unlocked the door, stepped out quickly, and locked it behind me. My car was parked about 30 feet away, 4 spaces down from his. I walked fast, keeping my keys ready. As I passed his car, I heard the engine start. My heart jumped. I got to my car, unlocked it, and got inside as fast as I could. I locked the doors immediately and started the engine. David's car was backing out of its space. I put my car in reverse and backed out too, trying to get out of the parking lot before he could block me in, but he was faster. His car pulled up right behind mine, cutting off my exit. I couldn't reverse without hitting him. I honked my horn. He didn't move. I honked again, longer this time. Still nothing. I looked in my rearview mirror and saw him sitting in his car, just watching me. I felt panic rising in my chest. I put my car in drive and pulled forward, planning to circle around and exit through a different lane. His car followed me. Not aggressively, but steadily. He stayed about 1 car length behind me as I drove through the parking lot toward the exit. When I turned onto the main road, his car turned too. My hands were shaking on the steering wheel. I told myself maybe he was just going in the same direction, that it was a coincidence. I made a random right turn onto a residential street. His car followed. I made another turn. He followed again. That's when I knew for sure he was following me. I grabbed my phone and called 911 while driving. The operator answered and I explained that someone was following me in their car and that I was scared. She asked where I was, and I gave her the street names. She told me to drive to the nearest police station and that she'd stay on the line with me. I told her I didn't know where the station was. She started to give me directions, but I was panicking and couldn't process them. Instead, I drove to the grocery store parking lot where I knew there would be people and lights. I pulled into a space near the front entrance, and David's car pulled into the space right next to mine. I was still on the phone with the operator, and I told her what was happening. She said officers were on their way and that I should stay in my car with the doors locked and not engage with the person. David got out of his car. I kept my eyes forward, refusing to look at him. He walked around to my driver's side window and knocked on it. I didn't respond. He knocked harder. Then he said my name. Not just hey or excuse me, but my actual first name. I never told him my name. It wasn't on my name tag because I didn't wear one. It wasn't visible anywhere in the shop. He said it again, louder. Sarah, I just want to talk to you. My blood went cold. The operator heard it too and told me police were less than 2 minutes away. David kept knocking and saying my name. People walking into the grocery store were starting to notice. An older man stopped and asked if I was okay. David stepped back from my car and put his hands up like he was innocent. Then I saw the police car pulling into the lot with its lights on. David saw it too. He turned and walked quickly back to his car. He got in and started to drive away, but the police car blocked him in. 2 officers got out and approached his vehicle. I stayed in my car, shaking, still on the phone with the operator. One officer came over to me and asked if I was Sarah. I nodded. He asked me to explain what happened, so I told him everything. The repair, David waiting in the parking lot, following me, knowing my name. The officer took notes and then went back to talk to his partner and David. They kept David there for about 20 minutes. I watched from my car as they talked to him. He was gesturing and pointing, probably making up some story. Eventually, one officer came back to me and said David claimed he was just concerned because he thought his phone wasn't fixed properly and wanted to talk to me about it. The officer said they couldn't arrest him because technically he hadn't done anything illegal. Following someone isn't a crime unless there's a restraining order. But the officer said they gave David a stern warning and told him to stay away from me in the shop. He also took down David's license plate and information in case anything else happened. He asked if I wanted an escort home, and I said yes. The officer followed me all the way to my apartment and waited until I was inside. I called my boss that night and told him I wasn't coming back to work until after Christmas. He understood and said he'd cover my shifts. I also filed a report with the police the next day, just to have everything documented. I gave them the security footage from the shop, which showed David staring at me the entire time I worked on his phone. 3 days later on Christmas Eve, I got a text from an unknown number. It said, "I know you were scared. I'm sorry. Merry Christmas, Sarah." I showed it to the police, and they said they'd follow up, but I never heard anything back. Lester C. I quit that job in January. I couldn't shake the feeling that David would come back, that he'd wait in that parking lot again. I also changed my phone number and made all my social media accounts private. I still don't know how he found out my name. Maybe he saw it on a receipt or a work order, or maybe he'd been watching me before that night and I just never noticed. Sometimes I think about what would have happened if I hadn't called 911, or if the grocery store had been closed. I think about him knocking on my car window saying my name over and over. I don't work alone anymore, and I don't ever close shops by myself. It's not worth it. Well, those were tonight's stories. If you enjoyed them, make sure to subscribe, leave a like, and let me know in the comments which one got to you the most. I'll see you soon with more stories.